A big problem or big question that always comes up in talks about the Hebrew Bible, and specifically the creation stories, is the fact that God is referred to as a plural entity. Okay, so in the first creation story, God says, "We will make man in our image." And the same in the second creation story. It says, "Man is now like one of us, knowing good and evil." So, we know that people refer to themselves in the plural when they're part of a team. Okay, so like Roger Federer would say, "I won the championship," but Tom Brady will say, "We won the championship." Okay, so you're speaking for a team, and so one explanation for the plural, for obviously the problem here is that the Bible is a monotheistic book, Judaism is a monotheistic religion, and here you have God talking himself as a plural. And so one explanation, or one way to solve this apparent problem is the idea of angels. Okay, so it could be that God is talking about himself and his angels. Okay. The problem with this explanation is that there's no mention of angels in either one of the two creation stories. But the idea that God is surrounded by other divine or supernatural beings is nowhere in the Torah, okay, nowhere in the 5 books of Moses. In the Torah, the word angel means messenger. This is it's not how people interpret it. That's the philological meaning of the word in ancient Hebrew. Okay, and it's the same it's not just ancient Hebrew, but also ancient Greek. Okay, so malach in Hebrew, angelos in ancient Greek, both mean the same thing, and that is a messenger. Okay, I appoint a messenger, he delivers my message to you, he is my angel, he is my malach. So angels in the Torah, there are numerous angels, or a number of angels in the Torah, and in the early books of the Bible, but these angels are either a human messenger from God, or maybe even avatars of God. Okay, so God kind of presenting himself in some sort of visible manifestation. But there's no indication that angels are divine creatures that sit with God as his servants or his counselors, as his entourage. Okay? This image of angels, this understanding of angels, is a later development in Judaism when mystical ideas about an afterlife creep into Judaism, and then even more so into Christianity. Okay, so you will see these kinds of angels, angels as divine creatures who are in the heavens with God in later books of the Hebrew Bible. And certainly you'll see them in the New Testament. Okay. So that's a long way of saying that there are no angels here in the creation story. That cannot be the solution to the plural, to God as a plural entity in the creation stories. Another solution to this problem offered by Christians is that this is a reference to the Trinity. And this is an element, a feature of Christian readings, the Christian reading method of the Old Testament, and in which they find various things in the Old Testament that preview or presage the New Testament. Okay, and so Christians might interpret the plural tense for God, the plural reference to God in this way, but we have to remember that that Israelites were reading the Bible for about 1,000 years before Christianity. Okay, and that audience for 1,000 years, many readers had no idea what the Trinity, or what the Trinity is, or who Jesus is. Okay, simply because we're talking about 1,000 years before Christ. So it's silly to expect. It's silly for us to believe that these monotheistic Jews did not notice for 1,000 years that their monotheistic God is referred to as a plural entity. Okay, so I'm not getting into assessing Christian understanding of the Old Testament, but I think we can all agree that the book's Jewish audiences for 1,000 years before Christ would not have understood the plural reference to God as evidence of the Trinity. Okay, so the author of this book, whoever it was, wrote this text for an Israelite audience at about 1,000 BC or whenever it was written around then. And that audience understood the author. Okay, it was a successful book, obviously. Okay, so the Trinity also doesn't answer the question, how did Jews make sense of this plural reference to their monotheistic God? Another theory that is suggested is that, look, if it's not angels, then what we have here, some suggest, is an inadvertent legacy. You have here inadvertent evidence that God was originally not a mono God, but part of a pantheon of heavenly deities. And these people claim that Judaism's polytheistic past was scrubbed out when the Israelites' ancient oral histories were written in a book, were written in the Bible. But still, so even though the editors and the priests removed all evidence that this used to be a polytheistic culture, a polytheistic religion, here and there, bits of evidence still, they forgot to scrub every evidence, or they missed some hidden, or actually it's not even hidden, but somehow they missed the fact that God says, "Let us make," in the very first chapter of the Bible. In any case, so that's another explanation. And these people, so they argue that these references as a plural entity are remnants of paganism or polytheism within Judaism. Okay, so the kind of evidence that Judaism's pre-monotheistic origins. Now, these people will also tell you, if you don't speak Hebrew, that in Hebrew, the word God, in fact, comes in the plural form. Okay, when you say God in Hebrew, what you're saying lexicographically is gods, Elohim. Okay, it has a plural ending to the word, like the S in gods. So it looks like a plural, but it operates as a singular. It's kind of like, if you think in English, the closest equivalent I can think of is the word news. Okay, you say the news is good, the news stinks, etc. And the word God operates the same way in Hebrew. Okay, so when you say when you say the news is good, or God is, or God's is good, that clarifies that despite the fact that this word has a plural appearance, this noun is actually a singular. And indeed, in most of the Bible, God is discussed in the singular tense, and his verbs are conjugated in the singular form. But here, again, going back to the original problem in the creation stories, here we see God referring to himself as a plural entity. Okay? So the question is, could these folks be right in saying that we see here a slip up, an error on the part of the biblical author or the biblical editors, and that they tried to scrub out all the evidence of polytheism, and here they forgot, they somehow missed it. Don't ask me how. But this slip up reveals, kind of lifts the veil and reveals traces of polytheism within Judaism. So, is it possible? Of course it's possible. But for this to be true, we would have to accept that the biblical author is so dopey or so careless as to contradict, in the very first story of the Bible, contradict the central and repeated message of the Bible, which is monotheism. Okay, God's unique status as the one and only deity in the universe. Okay? It's the same assumption that we see repeatedly in the documentary hypothesis. Okay? The assumption that the biblical author or editor is often sloppy or and careless and ham-handed in the way that he puts this text together, like stacking it or mashing it together. Okay, so and again, to repeat what we discussed about the documentary hypothesis, it's not just that the editor was dopey or careless, but also that ancient readers too were kind of dopey. That they just didn't notice these contradictions and inconsistencies, or in this case, the fact that their monotheistic God is a plural and talks in the plural. Okay, if you think that people in the past were really dumb, then okay, then this makes sense. But if you assume that people in the past are as smart as we are, as perceptive as we are, who knows, maybe even smarter, maybe even more perceptive, then this doesn't make sense. Okay, so why else? Okay, if it's not angels, if it's not polytheism, if it's not the Trinity, why else would a person refer to himself or herself in the plural? Okay, what other purposes? What other purpose is there, other than signifying that you're part of a team, for a single person to refer to himself in the plural? Okay? And the answer that everyone is familiar with is the majestic plural. Okay, we know if you watch Alice in Wonderland or any other work of literature or cinema that shows a king or a queen that we want to make fun of, you see them using what we call the royal we or the majestic plural. Okay, the kings and queens refer to themselves in the plural rather than the singular, as you and I did. Okay, so but there's a protocol to this. When a king or a queen addresses another king or queen, they say I. Okay? So when they're facing an equal, the king or queen will say I. But when addressing the public or a lower ranked official, they use the royal we. Okay, they say, we want this, we demand that, when talking about themselves. Okay, the king would say we. So it's a linguistic device that's designed to clarify some sort of hierarchical relationship. Okay, using the royal we aggrandizes the royal speaker in relation to the person hearing him. Okay? And in this case, the royal speaker is God. Okay? But then the question is, why is the royal we used only for the creation of man, but not for the creation of the animals or the stars or the sea? Okay? So, it could be simply that this is kind of a festive event. Man is the crown of creation, and so it calls for added formality. But the function, when you think of the royal we, of the majestic plural, the function of it is to establish hierarchy, not festiveness. Okay? Plus, in chapter 2, in the second creation story, it's not festive at all. It's God expressing frustration. When God says, if they eat from the tree of knowledge, they will become like one of us. Okay, so that's not festiveness like in chapter 1, in the first creation story. It's to express frustration that Adam and Eve have become like one of us. I'm sorry, if they eat from the tree of life, they will become like one of us. Okay? So the frustration is that Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of wisdom and become like one of us, knowing good and evil. Okay, so the festive explanation doesn't cut it. When what's much more likely and apparent is that there is an insistence on hierarchy, which is the whole purpose of the majestic plural. So when one examines the rest of this literary unit, which is the prehistory of the Bible, this is chapters 1 through 11, from the creation of the world to the birth of Abraham. So when you look at this entire literary unit, chapters 1 through 11, you see that that this royal we is used only 3 times. In chapter 1, when God creates Adam and Eve in our image. In chapter 2, in the second creation story, when God recognizes with alarm that man has now become one of us to know good and evil, and might become immortal if he ate from the tree of life. Actually, this is not chapter 2, it's chapter 3. Okay, but it's in the second creation story. And then the third time is in the Tower of Babel story, when God says, this is Genesis 11, when God says, let us go down there, let us go down there and mix up their languages. Okay? I'm sure that you can see here a pattern in the last 2 of these instances. Both the story in the Garden of Eden with the forbidden fruit and the story of the Tower of Babel, both of them are stories about humans' improper quest to be like God or to do godlike things. And God is clearly concerned about it or offended by it. Okay, he says so, and then he acts accordingly. He punishes and evicts Adam and Eve. He destroys the Tower of Babel and mixes up the people's languages. So it makes sense. So we see here that the aggrandizing language, again, the royal we, is meant to prevent a false sense of equality that would emerge if God were confronting man one-on-one. Okay, perhaps if the Bible said, Adam and Eve will now be like me, and I will do this to Adam and Eve, and I will do this to the builders of the tower. If that were the formulation, I will do this, or this is, God, Adam and Eve will be like me, like I. This kind of language would place God and mankind on a plane as two combatants, as two contenders. The royal we creates a difference in stature between the two combatants or competitors, clarifying that this is not really a fight between two competitors, but in fact, this is a story about a master, a royal master, disciplining a subordinate. Okay? Jumping back to the first instance, to God creating man in our image, where there's no punishment here. In this instance, just as in the other two, there's a theologically and philosophically troubling coupling of man and God. There's a suggestion, the idea that man is created in God's image, suggests to the reader that humans look like God, that human beings share some of God's features. Okay? So perhaps, like in the other two stories, the story of the eviction from the Garden of Eden and the story of the Tower of Babel, perhaps here too, because there's this troubling suggestion that man and God are the same. They look the same. They have the same inner characteristics. And therefore, perhaps the royal we is deployed there to work against the false impression that created in God's image conjures in the reader's mind. In this context, there really is a difference between, again, imagine if this were not written with the royal we, but just in the singular. There really is a difference between man is created in my image and God is created in our image. It created in my image really does create a sameness. Okay? And so in any case, the combination of these three stories and the uncommon use of the royal we in all three points to, it indicates how theologically and philosophically explosive the creation of humanity is. Okay? How troubling it is theologically and philosophically. Okay? Reading the creation story, reading the first creation story, created in our image, reading the first creation story in light of the other two stories that use the royal we, clarifies how unique humans are in the act of creation and how unique the connection is between God and man. So unique that it could lead some to believe, as many pagans did, that men could become gods, or that some people had elements of divinity, or that people could do things that God can do, or that God does. So the use of the plural form, or plural tense, for God's actions is not a sign of the biblical author's sloppiness or carelessness with the principles of monotheism. Okay, we know that this author is in fact very careful. He's very careful and exact poet in the way he constructs especially the first creation story. The idea that he's very careful and sophisticated, and at the same time very sloppy and careless, doesn't make sense. Okay? Instead, the use of the plural language for God is a sign of, again, not sloppiness, but super extra care on the author's part to clarify and transmit the Bible's central and consistent monotheistic message, about the proper hierarchy between God and man. Thank you.